cybersecurity really does need to be part of that design. And if the manufacturers and these global SIs, these people doing these big projects, started having that conversation, like you and I think they should be having it, I think we would see this industry explode.
Welcome to the Industrial Cybersecurity Insider. In each episode, we dive into the world of industrial cybersecurity. Join us as we cover the latest trends, innovations, and practical insights as we talk with leaders and practitioners across the industry. Gear up and let's get into this week's episode.
Hi, I'm Dino and today we have a friend of mine and a colleague I've known for a number of years in the cybersecurity field, Katie O'Brien. Welcome.
Hi, Dino. Thank you for having me.
When I met you several years ago, you've been working for some of these top-tier OT cybersecurity firms, and you continue to do so. So I guess what I'd like to know, I know a little bit about your journey, but let's have the audience learn about Katie's journey.
Well, I think it's been a bit of an interesting journey. I started out as a music teacher many years ago. And when I got out of college, I went and took a bunch of graduate classes that IBM had put together around management information systems, computer science. It's kind of important to know that because that's taught me enough that 3.5 years later in Atlanta looking for a job, I end up in front of a guy who says, "Do you know what Atlanta is?" And I'm like, "Yeah, it's a local area network." He goes, "You're hired." And that was how I ended up in IT sales and ended up working for a company that developed the first 30-bit protocol analysis solution and just loved that world so much. Really enjoyed sales. I think sales is so much like being a teacher, that you're going out and you're educating people, you're sharing your knowledge. And I think it's a really amazing opportunity to do that. And of course, things kind of progressed. I was with the company for a long number of years. I love small companies. I love being part of developing them. I was at a company called Network Instruments for 18 years, did some stints in DNS after that. And I was looking for something new and interesting to do. While I was at the last DNS company, just kind of felt I had run my course with that. If you look back at my history, everything I've sold has been something that's very interesting. It's not something that's mandatory on a network, but it's crucial to a network, crucial to keeping infrastructure up and running. And I got this email from a recruiter about industrial cybersecurity. And I was like, what is this? Because I'd been looking and nothing was grabbing my attention. And I started digging into it and I'm like, wow. This harkens back to everything I know about network troubleshooting. I get to play with protocols again. I get to learn something, which I also thought was fascinating. And there you have it. So the last 5 years have been just really immersed in industrial cybersecurity and just loving it, learning, and yet still able to utilize everything I learned earlier in my career.
Yeah. Well, in your background, though, outside the technical aspect, but you've been involved, obviously sales you talked about, but it's been marketing and a whole host of other activities in regards to driving these new OT industrial cybersecurity conversations, because you've worked for some companies that are still out there, that are growing, some that have been bought. And when you talk about, I know you talk about sales, but knowing you're really good at building relationships also, right? And trust, not only with your partners, but also with the clients. And I think that's been very valuable. So when you think about OT cybersecurity specifically, and you've been to S4 and you've been to Rockwell Automation Fair, have you been
No, that's the only one I've not been to. One day.
But you've been to other conferences and forums, as part of this field. What do you think is going to happen next? Where do you see this going, right? I mean, you've heard the throes of the IT/OT convergence conversation, the challenges with organizations such as the one that I'm a part of right now, which comes from the engineering side, the OEM, the system integrator. I have my thoughts on how I think this should work. What are your thoughts on how to make this work?
Well, I think there's a lot of different aspects that need to come into play here. I think that there's so many challenges, first off, just in cybersecurity, especially when you push it over to the industrial cybersecurity. You've got budgets held not by the guys you think you should be talking to, but by other guys who don't really understand it. And we end up, people like you and I, becoming this glue that brings them together. I think we have management that has been like, oh, industrial cybersecurity is really not the problem that we've been doing this for years. It's been fine. So I think that where it needs to go, I think there just needs to be more education. It's not included in master's degree programs. I go and I look through the curriculum for master's degree in information security. There's nothing around industrial. When I talk to kids in the programs, they don't even know what I'm talking about.
Right.
And I think there needs to be a change. And this is what I'm hoping for, that we see a change that starts from the colleges. We see colleges offering more so that people can learn. We see more online programs. We also see people who've been in the management positions for a long time educating themselves about things that are new to them. There's been a lot of change. We've got CIOs and CISOs who are now responsible for stuff they were never taught about. It was never really discussed with them. And I think they need to learn their jobs as well. I think that you and I've had this conversation before, just that cybersecurity is such a big part of safety. I think that we need to be including cybersecurity in so many different aspects of the conversations out there. So I think that needs to change too. So I'm hoping that we start seeing more of that. It'd be great to see more mentoring programs out there for people who are trying to learn cybersecurity so that they can really educate their personnel.
Yeah. And you've seen us do that, right? I mean, you've known me
All
long.
the time.
You've seen our team and pulling the kids out of school that have the aptitude for it, have an engineering background, technical background, and bringing them along this journey, right? Because to your point on the mentoring side, because the schools aren't teaching it, even big organizations in the manufacturing space and the government are not trying to produce these skill sets and capabilities into our youth. They're just not. So we got to grow them, as I would say. I call it the farm, the internship programs, which is really where you can begin to foster these folks. To your point about CISOs and CIOs, you're correct on their role, and it's been expanding. What I would say and what I've witnessed or what I haven't witnessed is them reaching out to organizations like ours who are working in their manufacturing facilities, have been for years, in some case decades, doing big projects for them, whether we're maintaining and supporting, helping with their industrial control systems, expansions, greenfields, brownfields, life cycle replacement. But we don't field a lot of conversations and calls from that group to find out who we are, what are we doing, what kind of practice do you have, what kind of partnerships do you have to assist them with what they're starting to own in regards to this OT cybersecurity. And I don't know when that will happen, how you make that happen. And I think part of it is IT organizations who deal with their traditional VAR or partner aren't driving that narrative either. Kind of pushing them and nudging them that direction. It's like, you really need to go over there and start finding who's working in your plants and what they're doing.
And it's funny that I will say, if somebody ever asked me what is the best advice you could give to a CISO or a CIO who now is like, oh my gosh, I've got these find a company. I work at Garland Technology now, and we are a completely partner driven company. And we do that intentionally because we see the value in a design group going in and talking. And I always sit there and I'm like, does your CISO know what you guys are doing? Does your CIO, have they talked to you guys? Have they started to learn about what you offer? Because I think you make a really bad point. You have so much experience that you can share. When they're sitting there saying, I need to put these 3 products in, you sit there and you're like, no, let me save you some money. You need this product, and here's why you need this product. Things along those lines. I think that the resources are there. They're just not reaching out yet.
Yeah.
And hopefully that changes.
I mean, I've seen investments from a capital perspective, because we, I both know industrial control systems are out, their life cycles measured in decades. The question then becomes is, how do we move this timetable from money perspective? Because a lot of times I hear we just don't have the money. And what I would say is if you have a capital project to put in a packaging line, the money that they're paying to do that, wrapping cybersecurity technologies around that is not that much more expensive. Right, to be able to do it. I mean, you're spending $25 million on a packaging line, maybe a couple $100,000 over the course of a couple of years for that line. It's nothing, in my view.
I think you're absolutely right. But if you look back, I was trying, in order to understand, I like to look back. If you think about IT cybersecurity, when that first came out, it was the same thing. This is just, coming now, but we dealt with this 20 years ago. There was no money. You'd go in, you're like, hey, what's your budget for security? What's your budget for cybersecurity? Oh, well, if there's any money left over at the end of the year. or then it slowly started becoming budgeted for. And we would have the same conversation. You're putting in a new data center. Where's your security? How are you monitoring this? Did you think about this before you designed it? That's my other favorite part is that, one of the challenges we both see is that when you're talking, well, that's not how I want to monitor this. That's not how I want to look at this. I need all this traffic. We know that from asset collecting solutions that we've worked with. Well, we can't get to all the assets because of how the infrastructure is set up. Now, granted, we're dealing with very, very old infrastructures in a lot of cases, but hey, if you're designing something new, design it from the get-go. It becomes a massive cost savings because maybe you don't need to put in as many sensors. Maybe we can architect things differently. So it does need to be part of the conversation from the get-go.
Yeah. And it's just, it boggles my mind how much it's not, which gets me back to the folks that are traditionally leading the project, because these projects begin 2-3 years in advance, right? As far as if you're going to spend that kind of money, whether it's again expansion or putting lifecycle replacement of control systems, and the conversation isn't being sprinkled in up front. And I don't know if it's because a lot of those engineering and CapEx people and operational people think that IT is going to come back behind them at some point and fund and or do whatever they need to do to say that they're providing cybersecurity around that stuff. And of course, what we witness is they never get close to the control systems. They never get down to that level, right?
Yeah.
Past that PLC and around all of those industrial control systems and the equipment associated with it. They just don't. Right. And to your point, it needs to be done up front. And that's a blind spot, right? Moving forward. The older industrial control systems, to your point of the age of them, yeah, but we still connected them. I was connecting PLCs to Ethernet back in the early 2000, late 90s timeframe. I'm talking over 25 years ago. And it's become common practice, moving forward to connect your HMIs, your motor control centers, your pumps, your drives, your robots, your PLCs, obviously, they're all making their way to the sensors, all making their way to Ethernet, connected.
Slowly but surely. Yep.
Some form of it that's out there. Still a lot of cases on unmanaged switches, though.
It's so funny you say that. I feel like I went back 20 years when I came into the industrial space, and I was forewarned of this when I started. They're like, Katie, you're going to run into these windows. And I'm like, I had to stop and think, when did I last use Windows NT? When did I last think about an unmanaged switch? And it's interesting now as other people start to join us in this industrial cybersecurity world, and you're explaining this to them, and they kind of look at you and they're like, yeah, you're wrong. And you're like, yeah, no, I'm right. But it is interesting. But I do think you made a really interesting point when you talk about they think that the IT guys are going to come in behind them. And I think what sometimes they're failing to realize is that the IT guys don't always know either. They're still learning. Now, I've seen a huge jump, I will tell you, from when I started in this world to now. I've seen a huge jump in IT guys starting to understand. But I remember the first time I met you and we were talking about it, about how many IT guys had never walked the plant floor where they're supposed to be supporting OT. And, some of them would say, hey, I put a firewall in. You're just like, well, good for you. What are we doing next? Because that's one point of entry. But I think it's really fascinating that it's, that's kind of like, I think they had this attitude, well, I did this, it should be enough.
Right.
But it's not enough. And I think that unfortunately, the news says every day it's not enough.
Yeah, the blind spots still exist, and even changes to the firewall, because if you follow the CPWE, right, the converged plant-wide Ethernet architecture, the design that most organizations, and some do, not many do, you would have two firewalls in that plant. You'd have one on the IT side and you have one on the OT side, right? Because if IT doesn't trust OT, why should OT trust IT, right?
Exactly.
But you have to have a skill set inside that OT environment to be able to deal with these more complex technologies, right? Software-defined networks, the firewalls, there's the security practices, policies, the governance, et cetera, microsegmentation, name it. Something that IT is good at in their world, they haven't figured out how to implement it in the OT world because, to your point, they don't spend time in that environment really to determine how they can leverage their capabilities and skills and partners to do that. So that being said, what we're starting to see a shift in, I don't know if you'd say the same thing, is that, managed services have been a big part of the IT world
Mhm.
for a couple of decades, right? Where organizations were like, we need technologies, we need enterprise systems, enterprise networks, access to all these applications. I'm not going to build a monster IT organization to do that. I'm going to leverage what I do have, and then I'm going to outsource, if you will, to organizations provide me those services. We're starting to see that in the OT world, whether it be
Mhm.
around networking, whether it be around cybersecurity, or even managing their control systems for them, as a tier 2, tier 3 support model. If the plant can't figure it out, what's going on with their packaging line and their drives and their filler, then they fall to somebody who may have been a part of that design build and has a maintenance and support role. Is this something that you've come across much? There's only a few core
We,
that do it. Rockwell being a big one, right? But there is
yeah,
a managed services play. We call it DG 360 in our world. I just didn't know in your space if you could come up.
we are seeing it, and we're seeing more companies coming to us at Garland, looking to us for, they're like, hey, we're putting together these offerings and we need to be able to get the data. So they're coming to Garland for our, purpose-built OT taps,
Right.
OT packet brokers, so that they can get the data out and start offering those services in a cleaner way. What I think is interesting is that in a couple of the conversations I've been in lately, they actually already have, like a visibility product deployed. It got deployed, but now everybody's sitting there like, well, we don't know what to do. We don't have the bandwidth to deal with this. We did get it in, we checked a box, it's up, it's running, and they're looking for people. And so we're starting to see people coming to us not only to help with the deployment of said visibility partners, but to then help get the information back to them to a central point so that they can start, providing those services. But it's interesting to see. I think that's something really, I don't know about you, I would say it's like the last year. Obviously, I've been familiar with what you guys have been doing, but until then, I think you were like really the first people I'd ever talked to who were doing it. But, what can I say? You're leaders. Everybody's following.
So you talked about Garland. So let's talk about
Mhm.
Garland a little bit. So
Yeah.
I know what Garland is enough to be dangerous. Why don't you give our audience the summary rundown solution story of Garland Technologies?
Well, the cool thing is Garland's been around since 2011. So next year will be 15 years. So we're going to be celebrating big. One of the co-owners, Chris Bahari, I've actually known probably 28 years at this point. He's had products that I've worked with my pretty much most of my career. He's just done a great job with that. As he likes to say, the truth is in the packet. So we are very focused, and we plan on remaining focused on basically getting you every packet so that regardless of whether it's a tool on the IT side or a tool on the OT side, our solutions are purpose built so we can deliver those packets to you. And we do a lot of work with a lot of the visibility partners on both the IT and the OT side.
Mm-hmm.
And it's pretty cool. And I think, if you ask me, what is one of the coolest reasons for coming here? This is probably one of the only companies I can come to where I get to use all the IT knowledge I had and all the OT knowledge that I've learned in the last 5 years at a company where I can talk to both sides of the fence. And it's just a really great experience. And we've got tools that can go on both sides of the fence that are built for that.
Now, we have too, right? I mean, it's definitely a key tool going into environments, again, that have an aging infrastructure, but yet they
Mhm.
want to improve their cybersecurity posture. And the question is, how do you get those older switches that are unmanaged, don't have
Right.
SPAN interfaces on them to be able to collect that information and move it to your OT IDS platform that you've invested in to put in. So it's definitely a good fit, but also really good for comparisons too. If you want to look at multiple platforms to
Mm-hmm.
determine that way the tools are getting the same data from the
Mm-hmm.
Garland platform,
Mm-hmm.
in order to assess, your decision-making process as you're
Right.
picking an OT cybersecurity platform. So is there anything that you'd like to talk about that we haven't discussed? Something you want to bring up? Any
Oh
topic?
gosh. I'm always curious to hear, what do you think is going to be the biggest influencer on OT in 2026?
Well, I just came out of Rockwell Automation Fair out of Chicago 2 weeks ago. They've thrown this term they put together. They call it software-defined automation.
Oh,
And
that's interesting.
yeah, and we know what software-defined networks are, right?
Yeah.
And those have been around for a bit, but it's the intelligence that's coming into these industrial control arenas with their applications, right?
Mhm.
Software, and how They can, extract all this relevant information to help with whether it be safety, operational efficiencies, improving their production capabilities and improving their cybersecurity. Because cybersecurity was laced in, I would say, 80% of the presentations that were given in the keynote sessions at Automation Fair a couple of weeks ago. And I would say that a lot of the partners that are there, the OEMs and SIs, many of them don't have anything regarding cybersecurity in the machine centers that they're building, right?
Hmm.
Equipment that they're providing, where they're using Rockwell technology and a whole bevy of other things to create some type of a machine center, right? Those groups are not thinking about those things, right? It'd be like, if you use safety as an analogy, it'd be like building a new car and not putting safety belts on it or backup sensors or cameras or airbags, none of those things, in the vehicle that you're
Hmm.
building. And a lot of these OEMs and SIs are doing that from a cybersecurity perspective
Hmm.
and just ignoring the technologies that they could have designed and built into the machine centers that's providing their clients, instead of just saying, well, it's their responsibility to put in the seat belts and the airbags and the backup cameras and the anti-lock brakes on the car. That's their job, right? When it really needs to come from those machine
Hmm.
builders, those system integrators, and those OEMs. That's my perspective. And I think that is changing some. But at Automation Fair, 8 out of 10 aren't there yet. They're just not.
But the interesting thing is, I feel like this is a conversation. This topic is something you and I have been talking about for years, feeling very strongly. How do we get these manufacturers to start including it? How do we get it, whoever's doing it, whether it's the manufacturer and SI, it doesn't matter. How do we get them thinking about that? Because I think they have this assumption that they all know what they should do once they get it in. Like you said, that they know they're supposed to come in, put the anti-lock brakes in, put the airbags, put the seatbelts. But what if they only are thinking, oh yeah, well, we put seatbelts in, that's good. And instead of thinking, okay, but that's just one line of defense. There's a lot of little sayings within our worlds. There's too many sayings. The only one that I've ever really truly liked was defense in depth. And that is where we need to be thinking. We need to be thinking about, all right, what if they get past this? Okay, what if this is only protecting north-south? What if this is only east-west? There's also southwest and southeast. There's too many vectors. It needs to be a design. Cybersecurity really does need to be part of that design. And
Yeah.
if the manufacturers and these global SIs, these people doing these big projects, started having that conversation, like you and I think they should be having it, I think we would see this industry explode.
I don't know how many podcasts where I make that point that the OT ecosystem has to get much better at this.
Oh yeah,
Right.
we
They have to
we
be
we are
the
not doing good.
driving spear of, tip of the spear in having this conversation, that every time you engage with a client who's asking you for whatever they're asking for in regards to the manufacturing environment, in that dialogue, there has to be, well, tell me about your OT cybersecurity strategy. Technologies are you using today? And if they turn around, which we hear a lot, well, that's IT. Fine, we need to talk to them. And here's
Bring them
all the
in.
why we need to talk to them, right? Because this is the data we're going to be looking for. Here's the reason why we need it. If they can't provide it, then we need to bring our own tools in to be able to do that, right? If I'm going to walk into an environment and I need to extract information out of there and they have layer 2 unmanaged switches, I'm coming in with my stuff. I'm going to bring my Garland taps because the switches you got out there aren't going to get me what I
Nope.
need. So I need a tap to be able to do that, right? And that's how you're going to know this is changing, when folks start going, well, I want to improve my cybersecurity posture. I'm not ready to swap out my network infrastructure just yet. The OEM doesn't want me touching the switch. Fine, I'm going to go in there and put a Garland tap in so I can get me a
There you go.
span port, and I can start siphoning that metadata off to feed my OT asset inventory, so I can get asset inventory and find out what my vulnerability management are, see if I have any risk and threats in the environment, all the reasons why you should have that stuff instead of just ignoring it.
Well,
So
tools are only as good as the data that is going to them. And that's the bottom line of what they need to remember, that if they're not thinking the whole picture, they're going to put all these tools in and they're still going to, like you said earlier, there's going to be blind spots they're missing. And that's what somebody's going to be taking advantage of. And that's where you start getting into, the things we don't want to talk about: profit loss, soft cost loss, all those things.
I just think that's why I think the OT ecosystem has to really start moving the ball I think IT will follow along or be happy that that industry is doing that, right? And then
Yeah.
IT would have a role with inputs and data that they want out of it, and knowing that at least we're moving in a path, we're going down a direction, and all the people involved are paying attention. Whereas I could sit there and tell you right now, I can walk into a plant. They could have 30 plants in their fleet. They'll have over 100 different system integrators working across all those plants. And they might have two that have an idea about what we're talking about right now. The other 98 are just out there trying to keep that machine running best they can for that plant and that client, right? And not do anything more than necessary to extract as much as they can out of those assets without pouring any money into it. That's just been the reality of it. Moving forward, I don't know how you think you're going to compete doing that.
I think we're going to start seeing the differences. I think they're going to start popping up. We're going to see companies who are being aggressive and having that design that includes their cybersecurity, and they're going to have less downtime. They're going to have less loss. And unfortunately, we know the reality is we always need data to back up. Why do we need to be buying this? Why do we need to be investing? And I think we're going to can just continue. The numbers are going to show, insurance is not going to save you. It really is not. I think that's
Or
one of the things.
other regulatory, depending.
Exactly. Look at your environment and sit there and figure out. I know that, for years, it was so easy depending on what you're doing, but in manufacturing, it's even easier to sit there and say, what does it cost me if this line is down? How many other lines does this affect? What does it cost me immediate profits? What does it cost me in lost revenue because I had to destroy product? What does it cost when I lose? I always go back to Clorox. How much did that lose them shelf space wise? Those are the things that I don't think people are having the hard conversations about. And then when you look at those numbers, you start looking at, oh my gosh, wow, if we had just budgeted $200,000 more for cybersecurity, we wouldn't have lost $2 million. But somewhere along the line, somebody did not want to have that tough conversation or get to the point that they understood. And I think, I'm curious, I know we're probably running out of time here. This has been such a great conversation. Do you think we're going to have more regulation coming out? I mean, I only foresee we're in America, so we're probably not going to have any more. But
not under the current administration, you're not.
But but if you're part of a company that's out of Europe, you are going to have more regulation because you have to adhere to those, don't you?
We are seeing some of that with PI, with certain clients, GDPR, that is part of it, even though it's not so much on the plant floor as much as it is part of the corporate global, legalese, and the relationships with their partners. I think that some of that will happen, but at some point, it's like the engineering organization we work for. Engineers do not like talking about things they don't understand very well. And so they don't bring it up, right? Now, if the client asks about it, they can ask questions and then they can say, hey, we got a group that does that, or however that conversation, but they're not going to bring it up and say, hey, I want to talk to you about your OT cybersecurity, because they're never going to know how the response is going to be coming back the other way. And they don't want to look like they're out in left field. And I've witnessed it just recently with jobs that we've got that we're working on, that some of the client-facing leaders just do not bring up this topic. And if you turn around and get the right person on the client side, they're going to turn around and say, I absolutely want to have that conversation.
So I think it's back to us, the manufacturers, the partners that are out there to ask these questions and, to say to them, hey, go have a conversation with your finance guys, because you're sitting here saying to me, I know I've had customers over the years saying to me, well, I don't know if we can afford your tool. And I said, you just told me that you guys were down for a week. How much did that cost you? I don't know. I said, well, I can give you median costs. I said, go talk to your finance guy, find out what that downtime cost you, and then look at my quote. And you're going to find that you would be out so much less money. And we're preventing either a repeat performance, or we're mitigating the risk that could happen in a repeat. And I mean, because there's nothing 100% perfect out there. But if we can sit there and make it as protected as it can be,
right. Well, I mean, we're hired to do that, right? With whether it be manufacturing execution systems, help them with their OEE, whatever. There's a metric that most plants, if not all of them, have determining on how well they make goods, right? Quality, performance, and availability of those assets. And, most discrete manufacturers probably run somewhere in the 60s to 70s, world class in the 80s, right? But if you can just move that a few percentage points, it's millions and millions of dollars to the bottom line. If I can take from you losing, 100 hours a year and unplanned, unscheduled downtime.
Why
That's right.
have to go through that? Why lose your 300 grand? Be proactive. I think we'll get them there. I think it's just going to take some time.
All right. Good seeing you.
It was
Thanks.
great seeing you, Dino. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to the Industrial Cybersecurity Insider. To stay up to date with our latest episodes, be sure to click the follow or subscribe button now. And if you found this podcast helpful or have a topic you'd like us to discuss, please leave us a review or let us know. Thanks again for listening. See you next time.